Ignored in first class. Moments later, they learned she was the airline's new CEO. The airport was buzzing with its usual rhythm of announcements, rolling luggage, and hurried footsteps. Among the travelers was a woman who moved with quiet confidence. Her beige slacks and sleeveless blazer were crisp, her gold bracelet catching the light with every purposeful stride. Her makeup was subtle, her hair neatly styled, every detail intentional yet unpretentious. She exuded professionalism, but it wasn't the kind that demanded attention. It was the kind that didn't need to. As she approached the first-class boarding line, she could feel the eyes on her. A middle-aged man with a leather briefcase glanced at her, then at her ticket, his brow briefly furrowing before he looked away. Nearby, a younger woman adjusted her scarf and gave a faint smirk, as if confirming some private thought. The subtle judgments were unspoken but loud enough to be felt. The flight attendant at the gate barely looked at her as she scanned the boarding pass. "Straight down to the left," she said curtly, without the customary smile reserved for most first-class passengers. The woman thanked her politely and proceeded to board. The first-class cabin was a picture of privilege. Wide leather seats, champagne flutes glinting on trays, and hushed conversations about business deals and vacation homes. She placed her carry-on in the overhead bin and sat by the window, her posture straight but relaxed. Across the aisle, a man adjusted his tie and gave her a fleeting look before returning to his laptop. The murmurs began not long after she settled in. Small, harmless-seeming things. The way a flight attendant lingered just a bit longer with other passengers, or how her polite request for water was met with a perfunctory nod. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. But as the plane taxied toward the runway, what none of them knew was that this flight would change their assumptions forever. The flight had just reached cruising altitude when the true nature of first-class dynamics began to reveal itself. The woman sat quietly, scrolling through emails on her phone, but the interactions around her painted a vivid picture. A couple seated 2 rows ahead received warm smiles and cheerful banter from the flight attendant as she poured them another glass of wine. A man behind her, reclining with his noise-cancelling headphones, had his blanket adjusted without needing to ask. But when the woman politely requested a refill for her water, the response was noticeably different. "Just a moment," the flight attendant said flatly, not breaking stride as she walked past. Minutes turned into 10, then 15, but no water came. The woman glanced up, catching sight of the same attendant now laughing at a joke shared with another passenger. She sighed and turned back to her phone, refusing to let irritation show on her face. Her demeanor remained calm, composed, exactly as it had always been. Nearby, a man in a navy blue suit leaned over to the woman beside him and whispered something. She responded with a small laugh, her eyes flickering briefly toward the woman. It was fleeting, but the meaning was clear. The whispers weren't lost on her. They rarely were. And then there was the attendant, returning with renewed energy, but no water. Instead, she stopped at the row ahead, addressing another passenger. "Are you sure I can't bring you anything else, Mr. Kensington?" Her voice was syrupy, her posture attentive. The woman smiled faintly to herself, masking her thoughts behind a practiced expression of neutrality. She was used to moments like this. They weren't new. But as the flight went on, the slights became harder to ignore. A tray of snacks was passed around, but her row was somehow skipped. When she pressed the service button to ask for assistance, it took twice as long for anyone to respond. Every small act seemed to build on the last, stacking into a towering wall of quiet disregard. And yet, she didn't push back. Not once. She simply sat there, an island of calm in a sea of assumptions. The woman across the aisle, the one who had smirked at her during boarding, broke her silence first. "So, are you traveling for work?" she asked, her voice light but tinged with something else, curiosity mixed with condescension. "Yes," the woman replied simply. She didn't elaborate, offering no further details. "Well, It must be nice to treat yourself, the other woman continued, her smile polite but strained. First class is such a luxury, isn't it? The woman turned to her, meeting her gaze for the first time. It is, she said evenly, with just enough emphasis to let the words settle. The other woman blinked, momentarily taken aback. But before the conversation could continue, another interruption stole the moment. A flight attendant bringing hot towels to every passenger but her. She caught the glances now, the quiet exchanges between rows. It wasn't anger she felt, nor even frustration. It was something quieter, something heavier. But she wouldn't let it break her. But what they didn't realize was that the weight they placed on her would soon shift, and the balance of power would be unmistakable. The cabin had settled into its rhythm. Conversations faded into hushed tones. Trays of food were cleared away, and a movie flickered on a screen nearby. The woman remained in her seat, outwardly composed, as if the microaggressions she had endured didn't weigh on her. But inside, there was a quiet storm of thoughts, reflections on a lifetime of similar moments, each shaping the resolve she carried with her today. Then came the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice crackled through the speakers, commanding attention. "I hope you're enjoying your flight. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge someone very special traveling with us today." The cabin grew still. Heads turned, curiosity flaring as passengers paused their conversations and adjusted their seats to listen. On board with us is the new CEO of this airline, a remarkable leader who has already inspired our entire team. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ms. Evelyn Munro. For a heartbeat, the cabin was silent, and then the murmurs began, rippling through the rows like a current. Passengers craned their necks, scanning the cabin for the newly mentioned CEO. When their eyes found her, the poised woman in the beige blazer, sitting quietly by the window, expressions of shock and disbelief spread like wildfire. The man with the laptop audibly cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable in his seat. The couple ahead, who had laughed and joked with the flight attendant, exchanged sheepish glances. Even the smirking woman across the aisle was now wide-eyed, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The flight attendant, the one who had skipped her row with the snack tray and water refills, froze mid-step. Her eyes darted to Evelyn, then away, then back again, as if confirming she hadn't imagined it. Evelyn turned her head slowly, meeting the gazes of those who had underestimated her. There was no triumph in her expression, no visible gloating, just a calm, steady presence that demanded attention without asking for it. The captain's voice continued. "Ms. Munro, on behalf of the crew and passengers, thank you for flying with us today. It's an honor to have you on board." Polite applause broke out, hesitant at first, but growing louder as the reality of the moment sank in. Evelyn offered a gracious smile, inclining her head slightly in acknowledgement. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it carried weight, an unspoken message that didn't need to be voiced. And yet, the shift in the air was palpable. The flight attendant hurried to Evelyn's row, water bottle in hand, her demeanor suddenly contrite. "Ms. Munro, I'm so sorry for the delay earlier. Is there anything else I can get for you?" she asked, her voice soft and deferential. Evelyn looked at her, her expression unreadable. "No, thank you. I'm fine," she replied, her tone measured but firm. She turned back to her phone, leaving the attendant standing there awkwardly for a moment before retreating. The murmurs continued around her. Passengers whispered behind hands, their eyes flicking toward her as they tried to reconcile their earlier judgments with the truth now laid bare. Evelyn could feel their discomfort, their silent reckoning. It was the same discomfort she had seen countless times before, in boardrooms, at networking events, in spaces where her presence was often questioned before her competence could even be considered. But this time, the discomfort wasn't hers to carry. It belonged to them. The applause had died down, but the atmosphere in the cabin was anything but calm. Evelyn remained seated, her expression composed, as the realization of her position settled uncomfortably into the minds of those around her. She could almost feel the weight of their stares, the tension of unspoken apologies hanging in the air. The man with the leather briefcase, who had glanced dismissively at her during boarding, now couldn't seem to meet her eyes. Instead, he busied himself with his in-flight magazine, flipping pages at random. The woman across the aisle, who had commented on treating yourself to first class, looked flushed, as if the revelation had drained the color from her face. And then there was the flight attendant, the one who had skipped her row and ignored her requests. She reappeared with a tray of refreshments, smiling nervously. "Ms. Munro, would you like a complimentary dessert? Perhaps something warm to drink?" she asked, her tone overly accommodating. Evelyn turned to her, her smile polite but faintly tinged with amusement. "No, thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "I've had everything I needed." The attendant's smile faltered, and she quickly retreated, disappearing into the galley. Evelyn returned to her phone, scrolling through emails and pretending not to notice the quiet flurry of activity around her. But inside, she felt a familiar mix of emotions. There was the satisfaction of proving them wrong without having to say a word. But there was also a sadness, a quiet ache born from years of similar moments. How many times had her abilities been questioned, her place in the room second-guessed? How many times had she been forced to silently carry the weight of their assumptions? Across the aisle, the younger woman finally spoke up. I had no idea," she stammered, leaning slightly toward Evelyn. "Congratulations on the new role. That's really impressive." Evelyn looked at her, tilting her head slightly as if considering her words. "Thank you," she said simply, her tone warm but reserved. She could see the woman wanted to say more, perhaps to justify her earlier behavior or offer an apology, but she let the silence linger, giving the woman space to sit with her own discomfort. It wasn't long before the man with the briefcase tried to engage her as well. "You must have worked incredibly hard to get where you are," he said, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "Running an airline. That's no small feat." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Hard work always pays off," she replied. "But sometimes it takes more than that. It takes people willing to see beyond what's on the surface." Her words hung in the air, simple yet cutting. The man nodded, his expression tight, and returned to his magazine, his attempt at conversation having failed to erase the earlier judgment he'd passed. The rest of the flight was quieter. The whispers faded, replaced by a collective sense of reflection among the passengers. Evelyn could feel it in the way they avoided her gaze, in the occasional glance filled with a mix of shame and admiration. She didn't need their apologies or their approval. Her presence alone was enough to remind them of what they had overlooked. But for Evelyn, this wasn't about seeking validation. It was about letting the lessons sink in, one that would stay with them far beyond this flight. As the flight neared its destination, the passengers remained subdued, their earlier energy replaced by quiet introspection. Evelyn noticed the change, though she gave no outward sign of acknowledging it. She was used to this pattern: judgment, revelation, and the awkward aftermath. But this time, something felt different. The smirking woman from earlier, still fidgeting uncomfortably in her seat, finally gathered the courage to speak again. "Ms. Munro," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I just wanted to say, I think it's incredible what you've achieved, truly. And I hope I didn't offend you earlier." Evelyn looked at her, her eyes steady and calm. She waited a beat before responding. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "And no, I wasn't offended. But moments like this do remind me how often we make assumptions about people without knowing their story." The woman nodded, her expression earnest. "You're absolutely right," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "I guess. I didn't realize how much I do that. It's something I need to work on." Evelyn offered her a small smile. Awareness is the first step, she said simply. Meanwhile, the man with the briefcase shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He cleared his throat and leaned toward Evelyn. Ms. Monroe, if I may, I'd like to ask, what motivated you to take on such a challenging role? Running an airline, I mean. Evelyn turned to him, her posture composed yet approachable. It's not just about running an airline, she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to prove. It's about creating opportunities, ensuring that people who look like me or come from places like I did have the chance to be seen and heard, to belong in spaces where they've often been overlooked. The man nodded slowly, absorbing her words. For a moment he looked as though he might say more, but instead, he sat back, his expression contemplative. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom again, announcing their descent into Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. Evelyn felt the subtle shift as the plane began its gradual decline. She adjusted her seatbelt and glanced out the window, the city's sprawling lights coming into view. As the flight attendants prepared the cabin for landing, the one who had earlier ignored Evelyn approached her once more. Ms. Monroe, she said quietly, her expression a mix of nerves and sincerity. I wanted to apologize for earlier. I didn't realize who you were, and I should have treated you better. I'm truly sorry. Evelyn met her gaze, studying her for a moment before responding. Thank you for apologizing, she said gently. But it's not about who I am. It's about treating everyone with the same respect, regardless of their title or position. The attendant nodded, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. You're absolutely right, she murmured, before stepping back to continue her duties. As the plane touched down, Evelyn leaned back in her seat, allowing herself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey had been a microcosm of a larger truth, a reminder of how often people are judged by appearances, assumptions, or biases. But it was also a testament to the power of grace and resilience in the face of those judgments. And as the wheels hit the tarmac, Evelyn knew that the real landing had already happened, right in the hearts and minds of the passengers around her. As the passengers disembarked, Evelyn waited patiently for her turn, watching the people around her. The same passengers who had dismissed her earlier now moved differently, more quietly, more thoughtfully. Some gave her a polite nod or a tentative smile as they passed, small gestures of acknowledgement that carried the weight of lessons learned. When it was her turn to exit, Evelyn stood with the same quiet confidence she had carried throughout the flight. Her beige blazer still immaculate, her posture still poised, she walked down the aisle without a word. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence had already spoken volumes. Stepping into the terminal, Evelyn felt a deep sense of peace. The flight wasn't just a journey for her. It had been a moment of clarity for everyone on board. Sometimes, change doesn't happen through grand speeches or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's a quiet moment of reflection that leaves the deepest mark. As she walked away, the flight attendant who had apologized earlier watched her go, the words Evelyn had spoken replaying in her mind. Treat everyone with the same respect, regardless of their title or position. The lesson wasn't just for the people on that flight. It was for everyone. We live in a world where assumptions often guide actions, but respect and understanding should always come first. Let this story remind us all to look beyond appearances and treat every individual with the dignity they deserve. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge and inspire.